Good. So, welcome everyone. Today I'll talk a little bit about some of the aspects of Balinese religion, focusing a little bit more on some of the pagan religions and the lessons that those spiritualities have, like Shinto and Hinduism, and also some of the older earth religions. And what's very exceptional about Bali is the fact that the very, very ancient religions are basically still alive. We've got the older layer of, let's say, pre-Hindu religion there, which is based very much in reverence of nature itself, which is basically where all spiritualities and religions come from. And then Hinduism, when it arrived in about the 8th century, was a very easy fit. It's a very natural fit. It's a very natural layer that kind of goes on top of those existing nature religions. And there actually, apart from Hinduism, there actually aren't very many of those earth religions around that are kind of practiced on, let's say, a national level. You've got Shinto in Japan, you've got African-based religions in Brazil as well, which are more or less formalized, but they're still a little bit fringe. So it's very interesting to see how this form of Balinese Hinduism is very alive. And again, the kind of crux of my talk today is how it is an example for us to look to Balinese religion perhaps as a way to understand our own spirituality, or what a healthy spirituality is, because it opens the way for many different ways of seeing religion, as opposed to, let's say, the dogmatic religions, which are very much based in doctrine, very much based in a book usually, or a set of doctrines, and those doctrines kind of create rules for how to live and how God sees us or how God interacts with us, which does kind of make it difficult to have, let's say, a spirituality that dialogues with the times, with the individual, with the collective, and so forth. So we'll start off today with, I'll draw a card for this month, or for this week. And okay, it's Hestia. It's always very interesting the way these cards come up. And Hestia is very specifically about taking the time to go inwards, to kind of sit by your own inner fire, your own inner light, and to let that inner light teach you, illuminate you, show you the way. And it's kind of very much about the individual finding their own spiritual path, as opposed to an orthodox religion that is imposed from the outside. And it's interesting I think in ancient Greek and Roman religions, but I think in most earth-based religions, the fire is central to worship, because the fire is the center of the home. The fire is where, we prepare our food, but it's also where we share space together. And of course, the fire warms if necessary, or it wards off wild animals. And the fire then also becomes or represents the divine light. So that fire is such a fundamental part of our spirituality. And I think regardless of what your spiritual beliefs are, it's always important to heed the teachings, learn from the teachings, learn from the teachers, but always run that by your own soul. This is what someone said, but how does that sit with me? And that's kind of, I think, one of the dichotomies of collective spirituality as opposed to individual spirituality. And we really do need both in the world. I think the problem with collective spiritualities or religions, especially institutionalized religions, is they've become so dogma-based that there's basically no space for the individual interpretation of that. In all the sort of major religions, like, in Christianity, there's mystic Christianity or Hermetic Christianity. In Islam, you've got Sufism. In Judaism, you've got sort of the Kabbalah and the mystical Judaism, which are all of them. They all of them are very much more about the more mystical experience of the divine, as opposed to the very doctrinaire approach that the fundamentalists follow. And that, of course, is the problem in any religion and spiritualities. You've got those two extremes. You've got the fundamentalists who follow the rule book, who follow the certain doctrines, and that's absolutely true. And if I don't agree with them, I kind of have the right to kill them. That's kind of the thinking that happens there. And then within a religion, you've got the other polarity point, which is about creating a direct mystical experience of the divine. And that kind of really softens the hard edges of the orthodoxy. And a very good example of that is someone like Rumi, who was a Sufi Muslim. There's much more of a mystical, ecstatic experience. So those orthodox religions, those religions based in the doctrine, in the book, in the rules, create problems for individuals, especially individuals who are searching. And of course, most people here, I would say, are searching, and the one size fits all rules no longer apply. But what I find particularly beautiful and inspiring about Balinese religion, and let's just remind you that Balinese religion is basically Hinduism. It's a Balinese form of Hinduism, which exists as a separate or protected religion within Indonesia. The rest of Indonesia is mostly Islamic with some Christian enclaves. So Indonesia does have a freedom of religion. Their only kind of rule is that there's the belief in the one God. And within Christianity and Islam, that's kind of obvious. But within the Hinduism, there's a little bit of sort of philosophical gymnastics to make that fit. And it does fit, because Hinduism does fundamentally believe that there is the great mind, and then out of that the different gods and emanations emerged. Just as within Greek and Roman paganism, there was the idea of pantheos being the all god, and then the different gods and goddesses are the emanations, or the different facets of that god or goddess. So Balinese Hinduism is therefore protected, and for whatever reason, it's kind of a fluke of history, I guess, Balinese Hinduism remains strong in this tiny island of Bali. I think it's 2 or 3 million people, so it's not very big. But they've managed to preserve their religion and their way of life. And, when you kind of see the aliveness of Balinese religion day to day, it's an incredible inspiration, because everything is based around the morning, let's say, prayers and mantras, around making the offerings at work or before you start work, doing so in the evening. So the spirituality is very woven into day-to-day experience. And it's kind of not something that one needs to go off and do separately, because people are going to think you're strange. It's something that everyone practices together, and they all express this as a culture and as a society. And what particularly struck me on this last trip to Bali was the way in which extremely ancient practices are still very much alive, even though you've got that outer veneer of it being, standard, let's say, Balinese Hinduism, which does differ a little bit from Indian Hinduism. But a lot of it is still very animistic, which means certain mountains or rivers are seen as very alive, are seen as places where the spirits of the place still exist and still interact with people. And I went to several different temples. They were actually kind of secret temples. We met some wonderful people there who were very open to us exploring some of these secret places. And even in the times that we were there were very few, even Balinese people who were visiting. Some of these places were built on mountainsides, and there were particular rock formations, and sort of around the rock formations a temple space or a holy space was built, and other statues were placed there, maybe Hindu statues, maybe just certain rocks or sculptures that were very eroded, that were kind of dressed up, to which offerings were made. And there were basically priests who tended these very kind of hidden, sacred, secret places. Day to day, it was kind of part of their work, is just to take care of this space, to receive, let's say, energy from that divinity that lives there, and then for them to also make that space available for other people. So, we were able to go and get blessings from the priests and sort of get blessings in, or have an experience in those temple spaces. And what was really incredible was to see how alive those mysteries are. I could just feel and imagine how these mysteries have been continuing for thousands and thousands of years, since time immemorial. And even though new layers have been added, or new buildings or new sculptures have been added, the essence has remained the same. And in Bali, this goes for, let's say, the mountainside temples, or the sacred caves. And then, you've got the water temples, which are places of purification. The element of water is always about purification and doing the ritual bathing, either to cleanse oneself after a difficult time, or to cleanse oneself in preparation for some important ceremonies or festivals, or just a day-to-day cleanse, when you feel, okay, I need to shift some energy. Those water temples are really present everywhere, and there's a certain ritual to follow in sort of cleansing your face and cleansing the whole body. And the whole idea of that also as a regular ritual is that we continue to receive the grace of the gods, the grace of the divine. And it's a continual process of self-reflection, and therefore also self-purification. Another example of that, of course, is also in Muktinath in Nepal, which is considered one of the holiest places in the whole Hindu world, where you've got the 108 fountains of Shiva, and one is supposed to go there at least once in one's life in order to be purified and to find salvation as a Hindu. And the word mukti means salvation. So you've got these smaller places for more day-to-day processes. Then you've got these places of pilgrimage for one's bigger salvation or one's bigger spiritual growth. And the real beauty of that is that I think subconsciously, psychologically, this not only builds a continuous relationship, let's say, with the element, but above all with ourselves, that we create the time and the space to reflect on when we need to do these purifications, and then to feel the relief, or that the work has been done and that we can start again with a clean slate. And the power of the actual water is also very palpable. In all the blessings in the Balinese temples, there's always holy water that's kind of brought out. And I found it fascinating that in certain places the power of the holy water was just so palpable. It was just so present, and you could really feel this other energy coming in and just washing away whatever was needed to be cleansed and to be cleared. And given the fact that there are so many temples in Bali, every village has several temples, and the different temples are dedicated to different divinities. And some of those divinities are very much local, whereas others are more general, like Shiva or Vishnu. Bali is also divided up into north, south, east, west, the different cardinal directions. And the different areas of the island hold certain energies given those cardinal directions. But then you've also got the central temple in Besaki, which is the mother temple. The temple that ties all of this together, that ties the whole of Bali and its different communities together. And just one of the little mythologies around the Besaki temple, for example, is that it is a night temple, and the stone is a black stone, a black volcanic stone that was used in building that. And apparently that temple was built only at night. So, none of the construction actually took place during the day. So that temple actually holds the energy of the night, holds the energy of the mysteries of the night and of the moon. Also then ties in with that idea of it being the mother temple. And traditionally the mother is associated with night, with the moon, with intuition. And one of the, I guess, special ceremonies that we were able to do there was with a priest, and he took us into some of these temples at night, and the energy was incredible. You could really feel the presence of that other world. And given that it's in a temple space, that temple space holds this energy of the other world, of the other possibilities. And then being in the night, that is really when the temple can flower or express itself fully, because it was made for worship during that time of the day. So that's sort of another example of the layers of how the religion works. Religion, it's not only about daytime worship, there's also nighttime worship, which is a more mystery-based worship. And those mystery-based aspects of any religion, again, going back to the Orthodox religions, that relates to the more mystical aspect of those religions, are very much about, first of all, creating a non-dogmatic and direct, intense experience of the gods or the goddesses, gaining an intuitive experience, but also of working with the magic, working with the energy of the darkness of night, which is where creation starts. It's in the light of day that things are kind of set, and that energies are, let's say, visible. At night, those energies become invisible and undetermined, and it gives us the place and the power to make certain things happen, to make magic happen in our lives. I think that secret spirituality has always been about magic, and I think this is in all cultures. In shamanism, which, if you want to think of the scale of religion, or the scale of development of religion, I think all religions started with shamanism, which is a direct connection to nature, creating a relationship with nature, a relationship with the spirits. And that then sort of developed into a polytheistic, pagan type of religion, where there is a more centralized religion around it. Temples are built, and there is a priesthood involved. And the next step, the third step, is kind of where it goes to monotheism. What happened in the case of Islam, for example, is that the Prophet Muhammad said that the only God is Allah. Allah was one of many other gods and goddesses that existed in the older religion of the Middle East. So it was sort of seen or felt that Allah was the the only God, and all the others were eliminated. The same goes with Judaism. Is there were actually, of course, it was a polytheistic religion before. There were many different names of God and therefore different God forms, and the early Israelite prophets became followers of Yahweh or Jehovah, and the other God names or God forms became eliminated, like El Shaddai or the Elohim. So it was actually out of the pagan polytheistic system that the monotheistic systems developed, but they actually excluded the other gods and focused on one God. And what that allowed, of course, is on the one hand a simpler, more straightforward spirituality, and generally that God that would have had specific characteristics became universalized. So it just became this one God that encompasses everything, without, let's say, the different facets. So the interesting thing always is, in these, from shamanism to paganism to monotheism, there was always the concept that there is one God behind everything, the bigger impersonal God, but that the different expressions of the gods and the goddesses were our inroads into creating magic. So that ability to influence our world, to change how we experience our world or the outcomes of our world, are the basis of magic, and are the basis also of certain spiritual practices like prayer and like offerings. That is the attempt by humans to have an effect on our lives, on our world, to influence the ways in which the world out there affects us. And that, of course, is very empowering. That, of course, is, I think, essential for any sort of healthy form of spirituality to develop, as opposed to a spirituality where, the great God, the monotheistic God, is kind of impersonal. They might listen to our prayers, but as long as we follow the rules, they're interested. And as long as we follow the doctrine, we might be worthy of our prayers being heard. So that that monotheism creates a very monolithic experience, whereas a polytheism creates a richness and an acknowledgement of the different archetypes. So when you want to bring love into your life, you would pray to a particular goddess. When you wanted, business success, you would pray to or light a candle or make an offering at the altar of a different god or goddess. So the different gods, archetypes had different functions, and we could adapt our relationship with them accordingly. And again, that's very much alive in Bali as a living spirituality, as a living experience of the divine. And there's always the understanding that there is a greater impersonal God, but within that greater force, there are the different facets. So on this last Bali trip that I went on, we really had a very broad range of experiences. And what was most interesting was these mystery temples, these secret temples, where the prayer aspect was very powerful. The offering aspect was very powerful, but almost it seemed to me the main purpose was the tending of that space, the kind of helping along of the god or the goddess that lived in that mountain or in that water, so that one could create a personal relationship, and that one could actually also, as a participant, absorb those powerful energies in one's own life, so that one could grow, and that certain aspect of life that needed to be shifted could be shifted. So, the different elements also are respected within the system. So you've got the water temples, of course, which are about experiencing not only the purification, but as in the case, for example, of Pechampuan, which is one of the places we always visit, where it's a juncture between two different rivers, and where those two different rivers meet, and the power of that place, that power place becomes a place that we can revere and experience. And it would not only be the two rivers that are meeting, but it also represents, on a more esoteric level, the different sides of ourselves that we are reconciling and that we are teaching to work together within our own consciousness. So in this particular case in Pechampuan, it's walking up this river. There are lots of shrines along the way. And then there are two very powerful waterfalls. And in both cases, one actually goes into those waterfalls, you feel the energy, you have a sort of release experience the other waterfall afterwards then, and then, return by finding the unity in that place where the two meet. And all along the way, one does the purifications at the different shrines. And, you do the water purifications, as well as lighting a prayer or making the offerings to the statues that are there. So again, it's that marriage between the universal gods of Hinduism like Shiva and Vishnu, but then also of those particular gods and goddesses of place. And so, that's the element of water which is ever present in Bali. And I think that ties in very much with one of the basic principles of Balinese religion, which is always about balancing the two sides, the negative energy and the positive energy within ourselves. It's to bring that balance through our spiritual practice, through our work on ourselves, because good and evil on the outside is reflected on the inside by the different forces of good and evil that pull us in different directions inwardly. So when we do these practices to balance the two sides, we find peace within ourselves, and we create the space to grow. So the water is particularly powerful in that, because water is about dissolving polarities on the one hand. It's about creating a common ground, or finding a solution. We solve problems when you create a solution. And when you mix water with anything, you're creating also a solution. And then the element of earth is also covered, and there's this very specific area in Tabanan where we went, which is an area of healing. We know where healing plants are grown, and there are 5 specific temples in that area. One is a water healing temple, actually, where there was a shaman who basically did exorcisms using the holy water. It was incredibly powerful to see this very ancient practice taking place within a Hindu temple. And then there were other temples where the kind of theme of the temple was power. Another one's theme was money. Another one's theme was leadership. And then the 5th one in that area was about harmonizing those 5 energies. Whenever you see the number 5, it's about reconciling the 4 elements with the 5th element, which is the divine. And the temple which related to working with power in this area of Tabanan had several different rock formations that were worshipped, and that emanated this energy of power. And by going there and sitting in that space, you feel how that power kind of teaches your own being, your own spirit and soul about what power means. And of course, when we can get that energy in our body, we can then radiate and emanate that in the world out there. These 5 temples that I'm speaking about in the Tabanam area relate to the element of earth, because they specifically relate to healing and worldly things like money and power. And then the other very powerful one was Gunung Kawi, which is one of the oldest temples in Bali, and it's built into the rock. Huge carvings carved into the rock face. And we were very fortunate, like as on the first trip, to Bali to do a ceremony inside this ancient cavern that traditionally the kings of one of the kingdoms of Bali did his ceremonies. And for me, that was just incredible to be able to, do the singing, do the breath work in this space that has been used for 1,000 years at least, and to feel the presence of the other people that have worked there, of the spirits that have worked there, of the actual mountainside and the energy of that mountain, sitting inside that mountain and doing that work. And doing work in there creates a whole different experience of spiritual connection, because it's not just about one's individual experience. It's the individual experience is magnified by the collective experience and by the energy that's held in that space. And I think that's one of the things that we in the modern world lack to a large degree, is the sacred, dedicated space, the spaces that are dedicated to the beliefs that we hold. Of course, we've got churches and mosques and so forth, and they relate to the Orthodox religions, and they don't necessarily allow sort of an individual or a different experience of those sacred spaces. So to be in this space in Bali where one could feel, the gods and the goddesses and the nature were very much alive, it just adds a whole different dimension to that experience. And the power of this sort of living religion is something that I think it's a big question that we all need to ask ourselves. First of all, how do we fit into where we come from? How do we fit into our heritage? And how do we redefine our heritage? And how do we practice our current spiritual beliefs? Do we do that as part of our heritage, or do we have to reinvent to a very large degree? And that's very difficult. I guess in a way it's kind of easier to come from a monotheistic religion if one is so inclined, and then to adopt Hinduism, for example. But that in itself obviously is difficult, because if we don't grow up in a culture, there's a lot of stuff that we kind of disconnect with. But then the other alternative of finding your own spirituality within your culture, yet something that isn't necessarily supported by one's culture, is very, very difficult. And I think a good starting point always is shamanism, because shamanism is a religious base that we've all had, and even though it's very much forgotten and destroyed in the West, certainly, we do still have examples of how it's practiced in other cultures, namely South America, Africa, Southeast Asia. And we can kind of start to piece together the common practices and the commonalities. If there's a beautiful mountain and it emanates a certain power, we can learn to become sensitive to that power, and we can perhaps learn to do some of our practices in that place, or to develop a relationship, let's say with the mountain, with its archetype, and we can start to maybe build altars there, or do offerings or prayers there. But we can start to actually create a very palpable, tangible relationship with that. And of course, the work with the teacher plants, the work with breath work, opens us to that as well. So shamanism is a very powerful way for us to remember where we come from, and of course especially to have direct access to nature and to build a relationship with nature. But the complications within that, I guess, start when we try to figure out, how does this fit into, let's say, a philosophical system? Do we adopt philosophies from other existing religions, or do we make up our own philosophies? And there's nothing wrong with either of those options, but it's very difficult. And the New Age is kind of a pastiche of different things, very eclectic, taking different things from different areas and kind of putting them together in improbable ways. And the New Age system as well also it's very much intellectual. It's about reading or understanding certain principles. It's about doing some meditation. It's about maybe doing yoga, but the different areas of life kind of aren't tied together coherently. And also, it's very difficult or rare to have the communities in which one can not only do the individual or smaller group practice, but to have sort of the bigger celebrations and the bigger observation of the bigger cycles of life, or the turning points or the rites of passage of life. So I really believe that it's important in our times, especially in these times of transition, that we start asking these questions and looking at and thinking about how we can piece together a coherent spirituality, not necessarily converting to something else, but finding our connection point with place, with community and other people, with practices, and in a coherent way, in a coherent system, so that we can find the multidimensionality and the full experience, a body experience, an emotional healing experience, a philosophical, intellectual experience, an artistic expression. I think it becomes increasingly important for us to find the ways to create this and to come together to build this sort of energy and this sort of future, because I think to a large degree the old orthodox religions are kind of falling apart from the fanatics. The fanatics are keeping it alive. And then on the other side, we've kind of got the new age, which is interesting, but it's kind of dissipated. But I do think we're already on this path together, and I do think that our work with shamanism is helping show us a way. But I certainly see this as a time for all of us to put our heads and our hearts together to find the ways to build something together. And again, a place like Bali is a very powerful example or a pointer in the right direction. And therefore, I think it's very important for all of us to also try and experience some of these living spiritualities in the flesh. It's one thing to read about a spirituality, but to actually have the live experience of a priest invoking a divinity and actually feeling the energy of that divinity come in, not only as an individual, but in a whole group. So these are some of the questions I hope that we'll be working on together and exploring together in the years to come. Thank you everyone for participating today.